Disparate Impact Disproportionate Burden Policies presentation. This is part of our Title VI Plan update for 2026. I want to welcome everyone and thank you for your attendance and thank you for being a part of this process with us. And so without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and get started. So on the agenda for today, we'll start off with introductions of the FCDOT staff and consultants working on this project with us. And then we'll get into an overview of Title VI and key definitions. Then we'll get into the major service change policies, along with FCDOT's MSC policy. Then we'll get into disparate impact disproportionate burden, or DIDB as we'll be calling it, and what the background of that, as well as FCDOT's DINDB policy, as well as multiple service changes. And then we'll have a general discussion about FCDOT transit. So we'll go ahead and kick off with introductions. My name is Kyle Davis. I am a transportation planner with the Fairfax County Department of Transportation. And my role is I work within the Transit Services Division. So we deal with the Fairfax Connected Bus System. And my role primarily is public involvement, public engagement, grant development, things of that nature. And I will pass the baton off to Brian, our other speaker for today.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. So I want to start with some team introductions. I'd like to introduce first the Fairfax County staff that's on the call with us. And then the Foursquare ITP consulting team will introduce themselves. And then I'd like to hear who else is on the call with us today. So Kyle, just if you want to introduce yourself once more.
Yeah, so, my name is Kyle. I'm Kyle Davis. I work with the Transit Services Division of FCDOT. I'm a transportation planner, and along with myself, we have Hejun Kang. Hejun, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Hejun Kang. I'm with the FCDOT, the Transit Service Planning. We're using this policies, the DIDB policies, major service change policies in our regular service change work to ensure like services are provided equally. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Sarah Allred. I'm in the Coordination and Funding Division, and we do coordination with Federal Transit Administration for grants and also ensuring compliance. And this is certainly one of the areas that we care about. We appreciate Kyle taking the lead on this.
Okay, I think that's everyone.
I think that's all the FCDOT staff for today. Yep.
Great. So I'm Brian Siegel. I'm the project manager of the consulting team here at Foursquare ITP. We're helping lead the Title VI program update today. And also on the call with me is Kai Chi. Kai Chi, if you want to say a quick hello.
Hi, good morning, all. This is Kai Chi. I'm the technical lead on this project, and we are working together with Fairfax together to updating this program. Nice to meet you all.
Okay, so I'll go down the list of names that I see here on the call, and if you could just give you a quick introduction. Okay, so first up here I see is Harmony.
Hi, my name's Harmony. I am with WFCM, Western Fairfax Christian Ministries. We are a nonprofit health and human services organization that is primarily focused on food and housing services, so providing rent assistance and groceries for community members, and we serve out in Western Fairfax, Region 4. Thanks for having us.
All right, thanks, Harmony.
Thank you.
Crystal?
Good morning, almost afternoon, everybody. My name is Crystal Trammell. I'm in Fairfax County Public Schools, specifically coming from the Office of Family and School Partnerships. Happy to be here and excited to hear about the updates.
Okay, thank you, Crystal. Norma?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Norma Lopez. I am one of the division directors at the Department of Neighborhood and Community Services. And one of the functions of my division is community engagement.
Hey, welcome. Anna?
Hi, I'm Anna Ricklin. I'm the Health and All Policies Manager with the Fairfax County Health Department, and so I liaise. Can someone mute who's on?
Yeah.
I liaise with the Transportation Department, the Housing Department, NCS, a lot of partners across the county to ensure that we're considering health in our decision making.
Okay, thank you for joining us. Rob? Can't hear you. If you're having trouble, maybe you could just in the chat introduce yourself. Finally, I see Soraya.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I want to apologize. My camera is not working, but my name is Soraya Borja, and I am the Vice President of the Community-Based Services with Second Story. Basically, what we do is offering services for youth after school programs, but also with the Opportunity Neighborhoods program, we are working in connecting community members with other services such as the government, the school, and also activities that will help to develop their community. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Kyle, can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you.
Hey, sorry about that. Rob Rutland Brown. I'm the Executive Director of the Lorton Community Action Center. We provide basic needs and self-sufficiency programs to folks in Southeast Fairfax County.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Is there anyone else on the call that we missed?
I'm here. I'm the Executive Director for Rest and Fish. My name is Carolyn Amaker, and we provide financial assistance for people who are at risk of eviction in Reston and Herndon.
Hey, Carolyn, thank you for joining. Appreciate it. Okay, anyone else? Okay, so let's continue. I'm gonna switch to share my screen now. Okay.
Okay. So,
Okay. Oh, go ahead, Kyle.
Okay, so the purpose for today is to review and discuss Title VI equity analyses and how they work, Fairfax Connectors Service and fair equity policies, and examples of how the policies apply. Now, today's discussion will be interactive. We will discuss examples and ask for your thoughts and questions. When providing comments, please share with us the perspectives of the people that you serve. We will share a link to the website with a public survey. Please take the survey and distribute it to coworkers and people who serve in your you serve in your organizational role. The survey closes on March 13th, which I believe is this Friday. All right, I'll pass the baton along to Brian.
Hey, thank you, Kyle. All right, so good morning, everyone, again. Just a housekeeping note as we go through the PowerPoint slides. I'll describe what's on each slide for anyone who can't see the presentation, and the recording of this presentation, along with PowerPoint translations, will be available online following today's presentation as well. Feel free to leave comments in the chat as we move along. I estimate the presentation to be probably no longer than 30 minutes. We'll pause at some breaks where I can answer questions. I'll have some prompt questions as we move along in the presentation, and then I'll ask again at the end for any questions or comments. So I'd like to start with some background about Title VI. Title VI is an important federal civil rights law, It helps ensure fairness in programs that receive federal funding, including public transportation. So transit systems like Fairfax Connector receive these federal funds, which means we must follow the rules when we're planning and operating service. Title VI comes from the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The law states that no person in the United States can be excluded from participation, denied benefits, or discriminated against based on race, color, or national origin in programs that receive federal funding. For transit agency, that means decisions about routes, schedules, fares, and service levels must be made in ways that do not unfairly impact certain communities. There's several titles within the Civil Rights Act. For example, Title I focuses on voting rights. Title II focuses on public accommodations. Title IV focuses on education. And then Title VIII focuses on employment. But the section we focus on today is Title VI. This applies to federally funded programs including public transportation. So what exactly is Title VI? Title VI is the federal civil rights law. It prohibits discrimination in transportation services. It requires that transit agencies ensure equal access and fair service to all riders, specifically addressing the needs of minority and low-income communities. It also requires transit agencies to evaluate whether service changes disproportionately impact minority, low-income riders, and they must ensure that meaningful access to services for individuals with limited English proficiency, LEP. So every 3 years, Fairfax County is required to review who uses transit, who lives near transit, and how Fairfax County communicates to its riders. This review helps ensure that past decisions were fair and equitable and form the basis for evaluating future service or fare changes. The last update was in 2023, so we're aiming for the next Title VI program update, expected to be published sometime around August of 2026 this year. Before we move forward, it helps to understand a few key definitions. So I'll start with revenue service hours. Revenue service hours refer to the total number of hours that a bus operates while carrying paying passengers. So for example, if a bus begins service at 7 in the morning and it runs until 7 in the evening, that would equal 12 revenue service hours for the day. And this measurement helps planners understand how much service is being provided. Then we have revenue service miles. Revenue service miles refer to the total number of miles a bus travels while carrying passengers who are paying fares. For example, if a bus travels 10 miles from one end to another and it makes several trips during the day, all those miles are added together to calculate the total revenue service miles for that vehicle for one day. Transit agencies use both revenue service hours and revenue service miles to measure how much service a route provides. The next term is route area. The route area is the geographic area that is directly affected by a proposed service change. So, for example, if a transit agency is consider removing or changing a bus route, the neighborhoods and communities served by that route area would be considered within that route area that we'll study. Next is service area. Service area refers to the entire geographic area served by the transit system. So for example, Fairfax County, it includes the communities throughout the county that have access to the bus system. And then finally, these last two important terms are minority population. For the purposes of the Title VI analysis, minority populations include people who identify as racial or ethnic groups other than non-Hispanic white. So according to current data, there's about 52.5% of Fairfax County's population who are considered minority. And then the last term is low-income population. For this analysis, low-income households are defined as households that earn just under $75,000 per year or less. In Fairfax County, just over 22% of households fall into this category. These definitions are really important because they're going to help us evaluate whether transit service changes affect certain groups or people more than others. So now we can move to the first topic of major service changes. Transit agencies regularly make adjustments to service. They could be anything from changing schedules to modifying routes, or adjusting the frequency of how often the bus runs. However, some changes are considered large enough that they must go through a formal evaluation process. These are called major service changes. So when a major service change is proposed, a transit agency must then evaluate the potential impact on riders, including whether the change could create equity concerns. Fairfax County has already established a definition for what qualifies as a major service change. And at this time, the county doesn't propose changing this policy from what the current Title VI program states. And that is, under the current policy, a major service change occurs when there is an increase or decrease of 25% or more in either the daily revenue service hours or the revenue service miles, or both for a specific route. In other words, if a route's total service level increases or decreases by a quarter or more, that change is considered major and it will require further analysis. So as I just mentioned, the major service change is essentially a change that is significant enough to require this additional review and analysis. Transit agencies must clearly define those thresholds in a written policy so that it ensures service decisions are evaluated consistently and transparently. So after a change, an agency must ask, is a service change or a fare change considered major that it's proposing? If the answer is no, no further impact or action is required, and a transit agency could proceed without analyzing impacts to Title VI protected populations. If the answer is yes, when a change meets the definition of a major service change, the agency must then conduct a service equity analysis before it implements the change. Each transit agency sets its own policy for identifying the major service changes, but many policies look at similar types of changes. So they could include service availability, such as the hours of operation or days when the bus runs. They could include changes to service quantity, such as how often buses arrive or how many miles or hours a route operates. Another category is geographic alignment, which refers to the areas or neighborhoods served by the route. Major service changes could also include fare changes. So if Fairfax County proposes increasing or decreasing the price that riders pay, or major service changes could include service reductions where service is reduced or removed, or service expansions where new routes are added or service levels increase. And then I'll just emphasize this point at the end here from earlier that transit agencies are required to review and update these policies every 3 years as part of their Title VI program update. So not every service change qualifies as a major service changes. Some changes are just considered temporary or short-term adjustments. So for example, a service change may change temporarily because of road construction, weather events, special events, or emergency situations. In any of these cases, the change may be exempt from the major service change policy because it's not intended to be permanent. So let's look at an example of evaluating major service change to see if it meets the threshold for a further analysis. Imagine that a bus route that originally operates for 8 miles, now imagine that the transit agency is proposing to shorten the route so that it only operates for 6 miles. The change reduces the total route by length by 2 miles. When we do the calculation to see what the percentage of change is, we see that the route has been reduced by 25%. Because the reduction is 25% or more, which is that major service change definition, this would qualify as a major service change, which would mean the agency would need to conduct an equity analysis before making that change. Here's another example. So we're going to imagine that a bus route operates from 8 in the morning until 8 in the evening. That means the route is operating for 12 hours a day. Now imagine that the agency is proposing to end service earlier, say at 5 o'clock in the evening, and this would reduce the service span by 3 hours. Again, we'll have to calculate the percentage of change. So a reduction of 3 hours from 12 would represent a 25% change of the original service hours. So again, 25% or more, it qualifies as a major service change. So this change, this proposed change, would require an equity analysis before it could be implemented. So at this point, I want to open it up to hear what your thoughts are. I'm curious to know if you believe that the current major service change policy still serves the needs of the community. Do you believe that the 25% threshold used to define a major service change is appropriate, or you think that maybe another threshold should be different? Any of your feedback helps us understand if this is working well or you think adjustments are needed. These are the same type of questions that are in the public survey as well. So if you'd like, you could raise your hand or just speak up, or you could also leave some comments in the chat. And again, we really want to encourage everyone to take the survey. It's important that we have all the comments recorded in the survey as well, which will provide the link in the chat. So I see, Anna, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I wasn't clear as you were presenting that the 25% is our current policy for a trigger for, is that right?
Yeah, for the
Fairfax
major
County.
service change policy.
I mean, to me, it seems a little bit big to a high threshold to have to wait to get to 25% before doing that. I also think it seems a little bit, is that how most places do it? They establish a threshold and do the math that way? Because, yeah. So when we're calculating that 25%, so say it doesn't shorten the route and it doesn't shorten the hours, but it changes the place of the route. So the route was going this way and it was going to hit the communities in this part of the county, and now the route's going to go this way. And so these people are going to lose service. Would that, how is that calculated? The population served?
Yeah, we look at areas nearby that are served too. So service availability, quantity, geographic alignment, and fares. So within a certain alignment around the route or the neighborhood served. If the route is moved, we'll look to see the disaffected communities and what percentage of minority and low income are affected.
I see. So how would you determine if you just, so with the change in hours, that's a very discrete way of doing the saying, okay, it hits 25%, we're going to do the equity analysis. But for the geographic, how is, you kind of have to do an equity analysis to understand if there's going to be an impact on different communities, right? Kind of to start, you have to look at some math and some demographics in the first place.
Yes, we'll look at the demographics of the entire region and then compare that to the region within a certain distance from the route. And that distance is determined by Fairfax County. And we'll see, compare that against the minority and low income within that disaffected range if a route is moved.
Okay. And then, I mean, I have so many questions about this because I haven't ever done one of these. With our minority population being greater than 50% of our population now, but within that, obviously, there is great diversity, and there are people who have high need, who look a lot of different ways. Is that considered as part of this, like subset populations, or is it just the definition of
the definition
non-white?
Yeah, it's non-Hispanic, white, like non-white population that we look at.
Right.
Okay. So that includes, any minority groups.
And then is the equity analysis that's used, is that defined by the feds, or is there, or do we have input on how that looks?
Could you repeat that one more time?
The equity analysis that you
Yes.
said you have to do if it reaches a threshold,
Mhm.
is that a defined equity analysis by FTA or USDOT or even bigger than that? Or do we define the equity analysis that's done?
Yeah, it's required federally to have an equity analysis for minority and low income, and it's up to the transit agency to determine those thresholds. So that's what I'm going to talk about in the next series of slides.
Okay, but the equity analysis itself, I'm saying, is that tool, whatever questions you're asking in the process of doing an equity analysis, is that tool defined by the federal government, or is that something that we come up with ourselves?
That's something that the transit agency develops.
I see.
It's required that the transit agencies develop, but it's up to the transit agencies to develop the questions and to determine how they're going to analyze the changes.
Okay, so there's quite a lot of flexibility in the role.
There is. Rob?
Yeah, thanks. I may have missed this, but I guess it'd be helpful if you could just clarify what's required when a proposed change doesn't hit the 25% threshold, because it seems to me like all this department at 25% or more in terms of getting feedback, and hardly any at less than 25%. It'd be pretty easy to game the system and just make a bunch of proposals that are at 23, 24% to avoid having to do all that work of getting the input. So I wonder if there's various levels of input and communication that are sought based on what the percentage change looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm going to get into that a little bit too. Once we hit that 25 threshold, what are the next steps for analyzing the service equity analysis?
But I mean, before the 25%
But before
threshold.
that, yeah, a transit agency should always try to keep in mind what that threshold is, and what the impacts are in the community. But right now it is that 25% threshold, which really sets off a whole series of further, more detailed analysis on how that affects certain communities. If we think that the 25% threshold should change, this is a good opportunity to kind of voice those opinions now. But it's up to the transit agency to determine what that is.
My opinion just would be, I would just be interested to see a layered thing where, it's not all or nothing. 25% is everything, less than 25% is nothing. Yeah.
Okay.
With any service change that we do, we go before the public, and we have an extensive process where we present change, whether it reaches a 25% threshold or not. And when we present before the public, we always explain, as succinctly and briefly as we can, Title VI.
Oh, Kyle, you went on mute.
Oh, sorry, I hit a button. We explain when we go before the public for any service change, regardless of whether it hits 25% or not, we do go before the public and we explain the Title VI impact, if any. So we, that it's not like we don't go before the public if it doesn't reach 25%. We go before the public with any public-facing change that we make.
Thanks, Kyle. Normal?
You do the analysis. Who sits in that analysis room or meeting or whatever?
Yeah, it's up to the Fairfax connector team to determine that final analysis. But Kyle, I don't know if you'd like to talk to that.
Yeah, we conduct that analysis internally. Hadrian, maybe you can speak to that a little bit more, but it's us internally who conduct the analysis. And then yeah.
The reason why I asked that, it goes back to previous comments. When you're looking at analyzing data from a lived experience perspective, it's always good to have people with lived experience in the room, in the meeting, to be able to look at, this is saying this, but that we consider that, or maybe that is a reflection of something. So outside of, in addition to the experts in the room, is really my point.
Yeah,
Yes,
Norma,
and-
and oh, go ahead,
Yeah,
Kyle.
this is Hei Jun. I'm with FCDOT, the Transit Service Planning Team. So yeah, I'm with my team to work on the equity analysis for every single service change. And also the analysis has been submitted to the board as part of the board action item for each service change. So, but we do follow the policies listed in the Title VI program, like the major change threshold or the DIDB, to ensure our analysis are done correctly.
There's also a public participation component of Title VI. So if the transit agency sees that it does hit the major service change policy, they'll conduct a service equity analysis and publish the results, and they'll hold a public participation. It's part of the public participation plan that's also outlined in the Title VI program. It's available for also people with limited English proficiency. It's made available in different languages, and public participation is required. Soraya, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, please. Some of the factors that I am concerned, since I'm working directly with low income and extremely low income community members, are that the access for employment. If public transportation, public transportation basically is essential for them to get to work. If there are changes on reduce or on certain lines of buses, my concern is like I already hear from community members that especially the ones that they work in restaurants or in cleaning, they have to walk sometimes because the bus has ended up by 12, or sometimes there is not lines enough by the workplaces. So that is my concern, how it's going to work for these people that they are in these industries. But also I work with youth, and my concern is like they also relied on public transportation. They work and also they attend school. I think the increases of public transportation is going to affect them, as well as how basically how can they rely in more if they have to pay more for these services.
Yeah, you bring up
Thank
great
you.
point. I'm sorry. I don't want to cut you off.
No, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so you bring up great points, and that's exactly why this Title VI program is in place. We want to ensure fairness, and I think Kyle and Hejun could speak a little bit more to this, but anytime there's a service change, we'll look at what the impacts are. Fairfax will look at what the impacts are to determine whether it's an appropriate service change or not. Title VI also goes that step further to see, is this service change specifically affecting a certain percentage of low income and minority populations who would be even more disaffected by the service change. So span is included, if the revenue hours of the route, if that changes, the frequency. So we want to make sure that we have the right major service change policy in effect. And also, I'm going to talk further about how we do the service equity analysis to determine, is this a fair change? Is it equitable change across populations?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that regardless of whether we hit the Title VI threshold or not, when we make service changes, we solicit feedback from the general public. We go before the public, we hold meetings just like this, where we we get the feedback from people, and we get turnout. We get people who show up and who express their concerns, and we take that into consideration when we and before we go to the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, who ultimately, they're the ones who have to approve any service changes that we make. So I just want to emphasize that there is a public participation process, regardless of whether we hit a 25% threshold or not.
Okay, Anna?
Just one more question. It's kind of minor, but a lot of transit agencies are moving to free fare. And I'm just wondering how that it was interesting that it's the definition is revenue service hours or revenue geography, revenue miles. If we went to a no fare system, is that still called revenue miles, revenue hours?
No, for fares, we look at just the percentage of the population that would be affected overall. So if it's removing fares for everybody, that would be equal across the board. So it kind of evens out.
What do you mean it evens
you're
out? If we're not taking in
Is it-
revenue, we can't use the word revenue.
Yeah, so we're not looking at like revenue service. Sarah, you just jumped on.
Do you mind if I answer this just briefly?
Sure.
In the sense of revenue hours is standard in the industry and is a term that is used to denote service of time that it's actually serving people. It's actually not about collecting fares. That term is used specifically for the transit service hours that the bus is running and operating to pick up and drop off passengers. So even though it's called revenue hours, it's not tied to whether fares are collected or not. And so that's why this industry term is used, so that we can know when it's actually picking up and dropping off passengers.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Sarah.
Okay. So I'm going to keep moving along. If you think of any other questions as we continue through the presentation, just feel free to add them to the chat and we'll answer them as we move through. So the next major topic for today is disparate impact and disproportionate burden policies. These are two policies that are required as part of every transit agency's Title VI program. They help agencies evaluate whether a proposed major service change to a transit service could affect certain populations more than others. When transit agencies make decisions about service, they can have some real impact on people's lives. So for example, changing a bus route could affect how someone gets to school, work, medical appointments, or grocery stores, as Soraya pointed out. Because of this, federal guidelines require transit agencies to evaluate whether major service changes could create inequitable outcomes. So the two main analyses, as I mentioned, is this disparate impact, which focuses on minority populations, and the disproportionate burden, which focuses on low-income populations. So we'll measure these to see whether certain groups might be more heavily impacted by a proposed service change. Whenever a transit agency proposes a major service change and it qualifies as a major service change, it must conduct what it's called a service equity analysis. This service equity analysis looks at the riders who would be affected by the proposed major service change and compares them to the overall population of the transit area. The goal is to determine whether the proposed change would create a disparate impact on minority riders or a disproportionate burden on low-income riders. So to do this, the planners gather data about the demographics of the riders who use the route and the community served by the route, and then they compare those numbers to the demographics of the overall service area. If the difference between those two numbers is larger than the allowed threshold, it could create an equity concern. So this process helps ensure that transit agencies don't unintentionally create unequal impacts when making service decisions. So we'll start here with the definition of disparate impact. Disparate impact occurs when a policy or action results in significantly different impacts on minority populations compared to non-minority populations. In other words, even if a transit agency does not intend to discriminate, the outcome of a policy could still affect certain groups more than others. So for example, imagine a bus route serves a community with a high percentage of minority residents. If that route is removed or it's significantly reduced, the people who rely on that route could be disproportionately affected. The key is that the intent is not required for a disparate impact to actually exist. The analysis focuses on the results of the decision, not just the intention that's behind it. So that's why transit agencies must carefully evaluate what those impacts of the service changes are before they're implemented. And then the next term here is disproportionate burden. It's very similar, but it focuses on the low income populations instead of minority. And then disproportionate burden occurs when a service change affects low income riders more than higher income riders, especially if the difference is large enough to exceed what the policy threshold is. So for example, if a service reduction mainly affects routes used by low income riders, that change could create a disproportionate burden. So both of these concepts are very important. They'll help transit agencies make sure that their decisions don't unfairly affect certain groups of people. Disparate impact and disproportionate burdens can occur in a variety of different situations. Many people assume that impacts only happen when transit service is reduced, but they could actually occur both in service reductions and service expansions. So I'll give another example here. A reduction in service might remove access to transit in a neighborhood that heavily relies on buses. But an expansion of service could also create unequal outcomes if the new service mostly benefits communities that already have better access to transportation. Because of this, the equity analysis must consider whenever a major service change is proposed, regardless of whether that change increases or decreases in service. And the goal is to ensure that transit improvements and reductions are distributed fairly across all different communities. Thresholds are similar in terms of changes in fare or fare media. If there are increased cost or reduced access in a way that disproportionately burdens minority and low-income communities, or decreased cost or improved access in a way that disproportionately benefits non-minority or non-low-income communities, this will cause unequal fare burdens on populations. So let's talk about how Fairfax County measures disparate impact. This policy is proposed to remain the same as the current policy today. The policy explains to determine whether a disparate impact may exist, planners compare two numbers. The first number is the percentage of minority riders that are affected by a proposed service change, and the second number is the percentage of minority residents in the overall transit service area. Earlier in the presentation, we mentioned that about 52.5% of Fairfax County population is considered minority, and that Fairfax County uses a 10% threshold when evaluating potential disparate impacts. So this means that if the percentage of minority riders affected by a service change is more than 10% higher or lower than the minority percentage of the overall service area, that it may indicate that a disparate impact has occurred and will require further review. This policy applies both to service reductions and to service expansions. So let's think about a service reduction. If a route with a very high percentage of riders is reduced or eliminated, the riders who rely on that service may lose access to transportation. If the percentage of minority riders affected is significantly higher than that county average, that could indicate a disparate impact. And for a service expansion, sometimes agencies decide to add new routes or increase service frequency. And even though it's an improvement, the agency must still evaluate whether the benefits are distributed fairly. So for example, if most of the new services added in areas with lower minority populations, while the higher minority populations receive little or no improvement, the expansion could still create an inequitable outcome. So the purpose of this policy is to make sure that both the negative impacts of the service reductions and the positive benefits of the expansions are distributed fairly across the community. So I'll walk through an example to see if this maybe makes it easier to understand. Imagine that the overall service area for Fairfax, it is 53% minority, just approximately, which is about Fairfax's percentage. And we have these three scenarios that are presented. The first is that the transit agency now is proposing to eliminate a route. As long as there's fewer than that 10% threshold or 63% minority in that area, this passes the equity test. The second scenario here is that the transit agency wants to add a route. Again, as long as there's fewer than that 10% threshold or that 63% minority in the area, this passes the equity test. The final scenario, we're imagining a service is being eliminated and there's a greater than 63% minority population in the area. Now, this would not pass the equity test because the difference is equal to or a greater than that threshold, and it would trigger a closer review to determine whether the change actually does create that disparate impact. If the percentage is even higher than 63, much higher, the concerns get greater as that percentage gets higher. So this process is going to help transit agencies identify potential equity concerns before that transit agency implements the service change. So now I want to talk about disproportionate burden. This is very similar to disparate impact policy that we just discussed. And this is also going to be proposed to remain the same as the current policy. The main difference is that this policy focuses on low-income populations, while the disparate impact focused on minority populations. So just like before, planners are going to compare two numbers. The first number is the percentage of low-income riders who would be affected compared to the percentage of low-income households in the overall service area. Earlier in the presentation, I mentioned there's about 22% of households in Fairfax County who are considered low income. So based on that definition, using this analysis, we'll walk through a similar example. Imagine a proposed service change affects riders on a route where 32% of riders are from low-income households. The difference between the two numbers is 10%. And just like the disparate impact policy, the county is going to use a 10% threshold to determine whether there may be a disproportionate burden on low income. And because we're equal to or greater than the 10% threshold to trigger a closer review, this puts it at that threshold where we'll have to analyze this a little bit closer. Again, this review helps us to make sure that service changes don't unintentionally place any greater hardships on people who already have fewer transportation options. So we'll walk through a disproportionate burden threshold example. So we'll start with the first scenario. The transit agency is proposing decreasing frequency of a route. And just a reminder that the service area is 22% low income. So as long as there's fewer than 10% threshold or 32% total low income in the area, this passes the equity test. The second scenario is that the transit agency wants to add frequency to a route. Again, as long as there's fewer than that 10% threshold or the 12% low income in the area, this passes the equity test. Now, in this final scenario, we're going to imagine that service frequency is being decreased and there's a greater than 32% low-income population in the area. This would not pass the equity test. So because the difference is equal to or greater than that threshold, which is that 32%, it's going to trigger that closer review to determine if that change actually does create a burden on low-income populations. And then sometimes transit agencies implement several service changes all at the same time. So for example, an agency may redesign multiple routes within a corridor or adjust service across an entire region. When multiple service changes happen together, it might make more sense to evaluate their impacts collectively rather than individually. So we'll look at the combined effects to allow the planners to better understand what the overall impact on the community is. So there's an example here, Route A and Route B. They serve the same corridor. We'll say that corridor is Main Street. Route A gains service in this proposal, but Route B is proposed to lose the same amount of service in that Route A is gaining. The combined analysis may show that the overall access to transit remains the same. So this wouldn't create a burden. This type of analysis helps ensure that the full picture is being considered when we actually make a transit decision. I want to use this slide to provide just a little bit deeper dive into how multiple service changes are evaluated. So I'm going to use the same example. Route A and Route B both serve many of the same neighborhoods along Main Street. Under a proposed service change, Route A is increasing from 2 trips per hour to 4 trips per hour during peak periods, while Route B along the same corridor of Main Street would decrease from 4 trips per hour to 2 trips per hour during the same periods. So looking at each route separately might suggest that some riders are gaining service while others are losing service. But if we're looking at Main Street as a whole, the total amount of service available actually stays the same. So service would shift from one route to another. Instead of evaluating each change separately, planners analyze the combined effects of service changes in this region. This approach helps determine whether the overall set of changes creates a disparate impact or disproportionate burden. So it just helps agencies better understand how an entire network is being affected. And then finally, what happens now that we've completed the major service change and the disparate impact and disproportionate burden reviews? If a burden or an impact is found on either of these populations, what happens? The transit agency must take additional steps before it moves forward. First, the agency must try to avoid the impact if possible. If avoiding the impact is not possible, the agency should also try to minimize the impact. If the impact still remains, the agency may look for ways to mitigate the impact, which means reducing any of the negative effects on affected communities. In some cases, the agency may determine that the service change is still necessary, but there are no reasonable alternatives, and there is a strong operational or justification, a financial justification. So that decision must be clearly documented in the service equity analysis and explained. Okay, so finally, I want to end on Title VI versus ADA because there is a difference, and I've had questions that come up about this before. The two are very much aligned, but they could be interchanged and often confused. ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act. They receive separate federal civil rights statutes and funding with distinct legal protections, but they both aim to ensure equitable access to transit services. And again, they're both federally funded programs. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act focuses on non-discriminatory distribution of benefits and burdens on minority and low-income individuals. It requires equity analysis, service standards, monitoring, language access for limited English proficiency, and public participation plans. While the Americans with Disabilities Act ensures accessibility for individuals with disabilities to public entities and transportation, it requires ensuring accessible vehicles, stops, facilities, and communication and complaint procedures. Both are regulated by an FTA circular. So finally, just how do they both reinforce each other? They both work together to promote equity and inclusivity. They both ensure that all individuals, regardless of race or disability, have equal access to public transit services. There's 4 key areas where they both overlap. The first one is equity monitoring. Both Title VI and ADA require that agencies monitor and assess how service changes impact different communities. For Title VI, this means that we'll evaluate service changes and how they disproportionately impact minority and low-income communities. For ADA, it ensures that disability-related needs are addressed and that service changes don't negatively affect people with disabilities. There's public participation involved in both. So both programs stress the importance of engaging the public in the entire decision-making process. Title VI emphasizes engaging minority and low-income groups to ensure that service changes don't unfairly impact them. And there's a public participation plan involved. ADA requires engaging people with disabilities to ensure that their needs are considered and that services are accessible. Also, language access. Transit agencies must ensure that non-English speakers and individuals with limited English proficiency have access to service information so that they could fully participate in the public process. It also requires accessibility for individuals with disabilities, including access to service information in formats such as sign language, large print, or Braille, ensuring that they could also participate fully in the transit programs. And finally, monitoring systems. Title VI requires systems to monitor equity, ensure services are equally available to all groups, especially minorities and low-income communities, while similarly, ADA mandates that monitoring systems track the accessibility of transit services for people with disabilities, ensuring that any necessary modifications are made. Okay. So now that we've reviewed all of these policies and concepts, I want to open up the conversation because transit planning, it works best when the agency could hear directly from those who interact with the service and the system every day. And I know that many of you mentioned that you worked with communities that rely heavily on transit services. So your feedback really helps us understand how these policies and the service changes really impact the real people who are using the service in real situations. So first, I just want to start a little bit more geared toward this disparate impact and disproportionate burden policies that we just spoke about. Does this still meet the needs of the community? Do you think that these thresholds are used to identify the potential impacts are still appropriate? Or do you think that the thresholds should be adjusted in some way? So again, just if you'd like, you could raise your hand or just speak up or leave comments in the chat.
There's a question in the chat, Brian. Let's see.
I don't see a question.
I'll just say it.
Okay,
Is the 10%, is that 10% additional or, added or subtracted from the, is that defined by us again, like the 25% from before? Okay. Methodology for, oh, go on.
Oh, that's it.
And then what is the methodology for doing the holistic review when you mentioned that, and I know the connector has often looked at several routes at the same time. What is the methodology for looking at, the whole system?
Yeah, so we look, oh, go ahead, Kyle.
When you say methodology for looking at the whole system, are you asking like, how do we develop service changes or?
No, sorry, for doing the analysis. So I know you mentioned like you had that example of 2 routes, but we're talking about sometimes a whole region of routes. Is that right, Kyle? Like sometimes the connector has looked at many routes together. Right. And I'm just wondering how we determine the potential unintended.
Yeah,
we
so we'll
ended
look
up
at
in the same place as we started, but we could have left a group behind and they just get folded into the numbers somehow.
The policy, so we'll look at the census blocks that surround a certain region where those routes are operating, and we'll determine what the total number of minority and low income populations are in that area versus for the region as a whole, and see if it meets that threshold. So it's just evaluating the population defined within the region of where those routes currently operate and where they're proposed to operate.
Yeah, I guess my concern is there could still be a pocket within the region that is left behind because the overall numbers still, math out, but that little pocket could, if we're not looking at each route individually as well, is there a potential for leaving a pocket of folks behind?
The Title VI analysis is not the only Like this is
Yeah,
not the only
sorry,
component.
this is
Oh, go ahead,
Hadrian. So
Hadrian.
if I can help clarify. So yeah, we look at each block group where the service, basically the list of routes changed, right, in the region. And then we look at the minority and the low income percentage of each block group around the revised routes. So that way we can evaluate, okay, what's the level of service changes for impact on that block group.
Okay, thank
So
you.
that's the refine. I believe that's the highest level of detail of data available from census data. So block group, which is a smaller boundary or unit, we can do the analysis by using this collective method.
Norma?
What does public participation entail for you all? What does that mean? Tell me, what is the process? What are the steps? What does that entail?
So we take feedback from a number of different sources. We take feedback from, we're constantly getting customer comments, for example. We get comments from bus operators and other people who are behind the scenes working. They tell us about problems that they see. And we also look at data. We're looking at data. We look at things like on-time performance of a route. We look at things like overcrowding, ridership data on a route. We look at all of these different things to develop service changes. And when we develop the service changes, we develop a proposal based on the data, based on the feedback from people who interact with the system in one way or another, and we develop a set of proposals that then goes before the public. Like I said, is similar to this, where we have a meeting, usually virtually, where we go before the public and we present, hey, this is what we're proposing to do, and we get feedback from that. And if possible, we make refinements to the changes based on the feedback that we get, and we package this into something that goes before the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, who ultimately has to sign off on this.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this other question. When you're looking at the public participation, you said a virtual meeting, and let's say you're considering a changing of a route of with impacts, a diverse community. What is the demographics of the people are participating in this virtual meeting and public participation? In other words, are they mostly Asian, white, Black, Latinos?
It depends on the service change. It changes from certain, there are some service changes where, because we put out a survey, right? Like we put out a survey, just like we're putting out a survey to you all. We put out a survey to the public when we do a service change. And part of that survey is collecting demographic information on things like race and income and things like that. Sometimes with a service change, we'll find that a majority of the people who responded to the survey are, for example, white and make over $100,000 a year. But some other times we find that, they're non-white and make less than, I don't know, 75,000 a year. It depends on the service change. We get different demographics who respond to different service changes.
And Norma,
yeah, go ahead.
I also want to add to what Kyle's saying. So in regards to Title VI specifically, agencies are required to have a public participation plan, which is in the Title VI program in the link that will be shared in the chat. And you could read what the public participation plan entails in detail for Fairfax Connector. But this basically, it involves the public in the entire transportation decision making, especially for those protected under Title VI. It describes how the agency shares information, it gathers feedback, it encourages participation from specifically minority and low-income and limited English proficiency populations. So that it includes the public meetings that I mentioned, the surveys that Kyle mentioned, community outreach, what materials get translated and the languages they get translated into. And we make sure that we have the right partnerships with community organizations to alert them when we are having a meeting, so that they could have the public attend or the stakeholders attend to the meeting to provide their input as well. The goal of the public participation plan is so that all of the members of the community have meaningful opportunities to learn about what the proposed changes are and then provide some input before the final decision is made on the service change.
Okay. Soraya, are you there? Soraya? You
Yes,
there?
I'm here.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me just, I was a former community developer, community engagement specialist. In your experience, since you've been working in the Como community for decades now, when there has been a route change that impacts the residents of the Como community, have they engaged in the public participation offered by the department or not?
No, and this is what I was going to propose. And I know that the survey will be ending this coming Friday, but what I wanted to share is that we are always welcome to do focus groups, probably in person, since some of our community members, some of them, they don't know how to read and write, not even in their own languages. But also having these barriers is always best to go directly to the community and ask them. That way, you will have a better perspective from their communities directly from the community members. So I wanted to ask you if you can extend it, and then we can organize a meeting. Our services are in Coolmore, but also in Springfield. So I don't know if that will work for you, so we can organize something like that.
I think Soraya is getting at what I'm saying. I think that if I'm a resident, let's say in Como, I've worked in that community for over 20 years. I'm not going to participate in a virtual participate. You offered it to me, but I'm not going to participate. So you're not going to hear my voice, although I may be impacted by the change of route. That's not so that I think that part of what you're saying here is that you have various community partners that help you do the outreach so that public participation incorporates more feedback from communities that are impacted by these changes. And I think what Second Story Soraya is offering is that opportunity for those communities that are traditionally underrepresented. Could have some say, or at least you could get their feedback.
Okay, yeah, and that's a great note, and this is why we're having this meeting, to hear what the feedback is and how we could better reach out to the public. I'm not sure if this is going to work for this round, but to have the public meeting, but definitely for future is something that we could consider. And thank you, Soraya, for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Sorry, to that note, Norma and Zoya, if you can just fill in the survey and maybe detailing out what's the approach that would make you feel like would increase in the exposure of the public participation, that'd be very helpful for us to take into consideration in the next round. Thank you. Like that in-person participation is very helpful. Thank you. I already put that in the note. Like what else you're thinking, you're recommending to become a method that we can reach out. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think what's important is for you all to reach out a little earlier. I mean, it's Friday is coming. It's only a few days away. I know we're very, very busy. But if you can give us a bit of more leeway, I think then we would be able to support the public participation better. But you can't extend it, and we can't create more time unless we move to Mars, which has 44 hours in a day. So you know what I'm saying? So we got to find a way to work together a little, so that we can sort of deal with the equity lens part and the public participation, which is, I think, what we're trying to do as both as county agencies as well as, with our community partners.
Okay. Thank you, Norma. Okay, I want to end just on a few more questions before I wrap up. I just want to know, for example, from hearing directly from the communities that you serve, are there any concerns people shared about the bus service? Are there barriers that make it difficult for some people to use transit? And maybe of some specific improvements that could be made for transit to be easier for minority populations, low-income residents, or people with limited English proficiency. When you share your feedbacks, it really helps us understand what the challenges are that these riders face. And then also, I know we spoke a little bit to, I don't think okay, yeah. The last topic is community engagement. So transit agencies want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to participate, like we've been talking about. So you mentioned in-person meetings. I'm curious to know, what are the best ways to engage with communities that you work with? What communication methods do work best? Are there organizations, groups, or locations that are more effective than others to share this information? So if anybody has any opinions here or would like to provide any input, we're happy to hear it.
I think one of the ways is to reach out to and I can give you that email because we just released our community engagement hub internal, to reach out to NCS. We have community developers that work very closely with the nonprofit organizations. So for example, if we can do in person, we would be able to sort of do the outreach with a nonprofit like we've been working with Second Story for decades now, and then put something together based on the questions that you have so that people can sort of participate in person. And then we would call the meeting and we would do the outreach and we would mobilize the community to show up and and then it would be free. It would be perfectly fine for you all to facilitate the questions. We can have we could do simultaneous interpretation. We can have an interpreter in the room. Some of us speak the language anyway, so that we can sort of do. So there's ways that if we can coordinate ahead of time, make the request, this is what I'm going to need, this is what I'm looking for, then maybe we can make an arrangement so that we can help you all out. And that would be, and we have staff that does this on a daily basis.
Yeah, and a lot of what you just mentioned is in that public participation plan, providing for sign language and those resources for members with limited English proficiency as well. So definitely in-person meetings, I'm hearing, is a good idea to make sure that we emphasize in future service changes and an equity analysis.
Yeah, I certainly I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'll just point out that we had in-person meetings before the pandemic. We switched to virtual, because of the pandemic, and we've actually found that we've gotten an increase in participation through the virtual meetings compared to before the pandemic with the in-person meetings. Probably because there's more flexibility. People don't necessarily have to go to a physical location. However, However, I'm certainly open to hearing what you're saying about the benefits of doing in-person meetings for the service changes. So that's certainly something that we will take into consideration.
Yeah, before Soraya speaks up, I don't mean it's an either or. You know what I'm saying?
It can be both.
Yeah,
Right.
You know what I
hybrid.
mean? You
It can
can
be
do
both,
your
yeah.
virtuals and you can have one in person. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So no, I'm not suggesting you go straight in person. That may cause that may be a logistical challenge.
All right, thank you, Norma. Soraya?
Yeah, I have to agree with you that, yeah, in person and of course online will be very beneficial, but especially because in our communities that I work with, they don't have access to technology, some of them. And also, not only they don't have access, it's like they don't know how to manage. It's really hard for them. So the other thing is that we do partners meeting that I don't know if you will be interested in presenting these to other partners that also they are working in the community. So for them also to listen to what you're just saying and pass along that information to their own the community members that they're working with.
So Soraya, this presentation is being recorded and will be posted online. There's also an opportunity tomorrow. We'll have the same meeting again. So if there is anyone who's interested and available to join us for tomorrow's meeting, be happy to have them attend. We'll also have the PowerPoints posted online, and I believe that they're going to be translated into a couple of different languages as well. So there are those resources too.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other final questions, comments?
Yeah, I just have one more question. So
Sure.
You'll be doing this whole process again in 3 years, it sounds like?
Yes.
Right.
Evaluating if those thresholds are the correct ones and whatnot.
Yes, correct. Yep.
Okay.
Every 3 years. So in 2029, this process will start over again.
Great. Thanks.
So just a reminder here, if you haven't taken the survey, please do so. Even if you provided your comments here, we're taking notes, but it's great to have them recorded in the survey. Feel free to share it with your colleagues, the community partners, all the people you serve. We'll keep the survey open through the end of the day Friday. Remember, it's available in English plus 8 other of the top languages in the region. There's survey links to each of the different languages. Once you click on that link that's provided, the more feedback that we receive, the better we understand what the needs are and the priorities of the community so that we incorporate all of that into the final program update. So thank you again, all of you, for participating in today's workshop. I really appreciate all of your time, all of your insights, and the commitment that you have to supporting your community. It really helps Fairfax County improve its transit services. So again, if you'd like to learn more about the Fairfax Connector Title VI program, please visit this website that's shown on the slide and I believe in the chat as well. And if you have any additional questions or comments after today's session, please feel free to reach out to us. Just again, thank you for being here and for contributing to this really important conversation.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
I echo that. Thank you all, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.